The point is that the Chinese are not a superpower. They are backed up by geography, by a string of islands that allow us to interdict constantly. China has had a massive economic downturn, and everybody's waiting for it to improve, but it won't. And this is the critical thing about China. If you go to Shanghai and you drive 30 miles west of the city, you see poverty like you've never seen before. China had one of the most extraordinary economic explosions in history, on the order of the American and the Japanese. So we've seen this before. And this is the basic problem of export-oriented economies. You can say, wow, they've taken over a country and everything else. No, what's going to happen is they run out of room to grow. Countries like the United States block their exports. They go down. So what Japan happened to Japan a couple of years ago, it went into China went into a nosedive. It went into an economic nosedive that it can't recover from because its economy is based on powerful exports and Western investment in its businesses. And that's not going to happen again because the rest of the world is also in recession, or about to be, whatever Biden decides we are. We're in this economic problem. We cannot float the Chinese, and therefore the Chinese are in deep trouble. Their problem is domestic. Their problem is that there are vast parts of China that never experienced growth. If you go to Shanghai and you drive 30 miles west of the city, you see poverty like you've never seen before. The coastal region that trades with the rest of the world does fine. The rest of the country really doesn't. And so, we can say, because I'm an expert in this field, that Chinese people are really upset with poverty. Okay? I've studied this. And so what you have is a political crisis emerging. And in that political crisis emerging, the former president gets led out of the building by horse. Why? Because he was a successful president, not because he personally, it was just he got the right time. Xi can't admit that he's hosed, so he has to find somebody else. Poor who is let out of the room, and we won't see him again for a while, maybe. So what you have is China in tremendous trouble. Now the question comes up, will they invade Taiwan? What do they want with Taiwan? What problem will holding Taiwan solve? What does that do for you? It makes you feel good for a couple of days, but then everybody's out there. Plus, how do you invade Taiwan? Taiwan is an amphibious operation. And here I am at the Naval Institute, so I will not tell you how hard it is to conduct amphibious operations over a distance that takes you at least 9 hours to reach in mass force Taiwan. And how many ways U.S. satellites can pick up the movement, and how many ways can submarines, missiles, whatever you want, think about. What is China's fundamental fear? The one they never express. That we will mine their harbors. If the United States mines their harbors, China is an exporting power and importing power. We can block China over all sorts of reasons. I once said this to a senior Chinese officer, and he said, but you can't use submarines in the South China Sea. What do I know? So, okay, what do you think we will use? How about aircraft dropping mines? How's that work for you? The point is that the Chinese are not a superpower. They are backed up by geography, by a string of islands that allow us to interdict constantly. We have a line of allies from Japan, South Korea, Taiwan for sure, Philippines, Indonesia, if it's Saturday, you know, give me a chance. Indonesia, Straits of Malacca. We have the Australians with us. We have the Japanese actually building ships. We should be really careful with this. The balance of power is so overwhelmingly against China at sea. They can, if they want, invade Pakistan, and they're welcome to it. But coming at us, coming at the U.S. Navy deployed just a little to the east of the line, is not possible. So when we look at the situation clearly, when we take a look at what is the situation that we're looking at, one, the Russians are in desperate trouble, and so long as we hold our ground, we don't take casualties, and the Russians are going to have to sue for peace. Putin will wind up in day camp or something. The Chinese are incapable of taking Taiwan, and if they took it, so what? All those who care about Taiwan, raise your hands. Yes, you would get a sense of loss, a sense of, are we capable of defending? And that matters. But in geopolitics, we're kind of ruthless in our thinking. The Chinese aren't going to do that because they don't get much out of it, and they could fail. And the one thing the Chinese can't afford is screwing up an assault on Taiwan. They can't do. People have said, what did the Chinese learn from the Russians in Ukraine? Don't screw up. Very important lesson. Are you sure you can take the U.S. fleet? Well, I think I can. That's not good enough. So we're in a situation where a Russian-Chinese alignment is impossible. It's just geographically impossible, historically impossible. Secondly, we've seen Russia do something that it absolutely had to do and is in the process of failure. And we see the cost there is. In the Pacific, we see China focusing on a non-critical solution. Take the Philippines. That's a serious solution. Taiwan can be surrounded. Taiwan can be overcome. Taiwan maybe is the best place to do where you waste the Chinese military. A lot of different ways. But what the Chinese have learned is don't mess with the Americans. Now, I got criticized by my readers for being pro-American. Yuck, okay. But the point is, what has emerged from this is the enormous power of the United States. Unorthodox power. It is not the power the Russians expected to see. It is not the Americans standing back and waiting to surge into Ukraine. It is building a structure that doesn't require it. In other words, we look pretty smart. Not that often, but here we go. In China, they keep saying they're going to have a nuclear war. Do they understand that they will be personally nuclear dust 30 minutes afterwards? Yes, they do, which is why they don't do it. As I said about Iran once, the best thing to have is a nuclear program. The worst thing to have is a nuclear weapon. This was about Israel. Okay? Israel can live with a nuclear program. Nuclear weapon, it's going to hit. And the same thing with what we're seeing here. So what is emerging from this, counter to what you will hear, I think, from most other people, is the tremendous power of the United States. A very idiosyncratic power,